Listen closely, because what I'm about to share with you will fundamentally change how you understand power, influence, and human psychology. This isn't just another motivational speech or surface-level self-help advice. This is about mastering one of the most profound and counterintuitive principles of human behavior. A principle that I call the law of the void. The terrifying power of offering nothing there. Exists a kind of presence in this world that doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to impress anyone. It doesn't even need to exist loudly in the spaces it occupies. This is the presence of the void, the person who offers nothing in a world where everyone is desperately offering everything. No excessive emotion, no needy validation, no desperate approval-seeking behavior. This person becomes something far more powerful than those who constantly perform. They become a mirror. When you become this void, you force everyone around you to fill in the silence you create. You make them interpret the blankness. You cause them to project their own insecurities, desires, fears, and fantasies into the empty space you've deliberately constructed. And here's what most people will never understand. In doing so, you gain control over them, not by overpowering them with force or manipulation, but by making them collapse into themselves. This is what I call Machiavelli's hidden law. And it's simple yet devastating. Offer them nothing, and they will give you everything. The psychology of the unknowable. Let me explain exactly how this works on a psychological level, because understanding the mechanism is crucial to implementing this principle effectively. When you become the void, you force other people to do all the emotional and psychological work in every interaction. You become ungraspable, unknowable, and completely unreadable. And in a world where literally everyone is screaming to be understood, posting their every thought on social media, oversharing their feelings, explaining their every action, your silence becomes an obsession for others. Think about that for a moment. Your absence becomes presence. Your lack of hunger becomes the very thing that draws others toward you, like moths to a flame. Why? Because human beings are fundamentally wired in a specific way that you can exploit once you understand it. Research in cognitive psychology, particularly the work done on the Zeigarnik effect, shows us that human minds are obsessed with incompleteness. We remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones. We're drawn to unresolved mysteries. Our brains literally cannot let go of things that remain undefined or unexplained. This is hardwired into our neurology. It's not a choice. It's an evolutionary adaptation that helped our ancestors survive by staying alert to potential threats in the environment. So here's the truth that most people refuse to accept. People are not drawn to what they can predict. They're drawn to what they cannot decode. When you deliberately withhold attention, emotion, opinion, and even aspects of your identity, you create a vacuum in the psychological space around you. And humans are fundamentally, compulsively wired to fill vacuums. We hate the unknown with a passion. We hate ambiguity. Yet paradoxically, we're completely addicted to it. Studies in social psychology, particularly those examining uncertainty and attraction, have repeatedly demonstrated that moderate ambiguity actually increases attraction and interest. When people can't fully figure you out, their brain goes into overdrive trying to solve the puzzle you represent. They become invested in ways they never would be if you simply laid all your cards on the table. So when you give them nothing, when you offer no emotional validation, no explanations, no desperate attempts to be understood, they lean in closer. They ask more questions. They chase harder. They offer more and more of themselves just to understand you, just to define you, just to gain a foothold in your world. This is where true power begins. Not when you declare yourself and your intentions to the world, but when you let others declare things for you based on their interpretations of your silence. The strategic advantage of silence. Here's something most people never consider. When you speak, people can judge you. They can categorize you. They can put you in a box and decide whether you're worth their time. But when you say nothing, they must guess. And in their guessing, they often give away far more than you ever would have revealed voluntarily. This is the genius behind the law of the void. You win not by fighting, but by not showing up to the fight at all. And somehow, despite your absence, everyone else still loses. Let me contrast this with how most people operate, so you can see the stark difference. Most people overshare constantly. They over-explain every decision. They overexpose every aspect of their lives on social media and in conversations. They genuinely believe that being known equals being respected. They think transparency equals power. But here's what actually happens. The more you reveal about yourself, the more people categorize you. The more you express your thoughts and feelings, the more they limit their perception of who you are. And worst of all, the more you offer freely, the less valuable you become to others. This isn't cynical. It's just basic economics applied to human relationships. When something is always available, always visible, always predictable, it is never feared and never deeply wanted. It just exists. It becomes background noise that people tune out without even realizing they're doing it. But when you become nothing, when you become the void, you simultaneously become everything to those around you. You become a space that people rush to fill with their projections. You become the question that no one can answer, no matter how much they obsess over it. You become the silent presence in a loud room that makes everyone instinctively lower their voice when you're near. This is weaponized emptiness. Now, I need to be absolutely clear about something crucial. This is not a passive strategy. This isn't about being shy or insecure or afraid to express yourself. This is weaponized emptiness, a deliberate, calculated strategy that requires tremendous inner strength and discipline. You don't withdraw from expressing yourself because you're insecure about who you are. You withdraw because you understand at a fundamental level that silence builds altitude in social hierarchies. Ambiguity builds obsession in others. Being unknown is actually the highest form of leverage you can possess in any social, professional, or romantic context. Look at the most powerful figures throughout history, not the loud ones who are eventually forgotten, but the ones who said very little and yet dominated every room they entered, every negotiation they participated in, every social dynamic they were part of. Think about Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor of Rome, who watched the empire crumble around him without complaint, without dramatic speeches, without public displays of emotion. His stoic silence made him legendary, and his private writings became more influential than any public declarations could have been. Think about Genghis Khan, who would offer false treaties and diplomatic silence before unleashing total destruction on his enemies. His unpredictability, his refusal to telegraph his intentions, made him unstoppable. Think about Machiavelli himself, writing in exile, speaking to the few people who would listen, while his silence and mystery screamed to the masses. The historical figures who revealed the least about their true thoughts and intentions often shaped history the most profoundly. This pattern repeats throughout history because it's based on fundamental human psychology that doesn't change across cultures or centuries. The natural law of the void even in nature itself. This law holds true in ways that are both beautiful and terrifying when you really think about them. The black hole, the most powerful object we know of in the universe, doesn't devour galaxies by radiating light and announcing its presence. It pulls everything in through invisible gravity, through the absence of light, through the void itself. Its power comes precisely from what it doesn't show, not from what it displays. The ocean has power, not because it announces itself with noise and spectacle, but because of its depth, its mystery, its fundamental refusal to be held or controlled or fully understood by human beings. When you become the void in human interactions, you move like these natural forces. You remain still, quiet, yet heavy with unspoken meaning. And others feel this weight even if they can't articulate exactly what they're sensing. They perceive your detachment, your restraint, your self-possession. And that unreachable energy is precisely what makes you magnetic rather than repulsive. Neuroscience, research on mirror neurons and social cognition shows us that humans are constantly scanning others for emotional cues and social signals. When those signals are absent or minimal, the brain actually works harder to find patterns, investing more cognitive resources into understanding the person. This increased mental investment translates directly into increased emotional investment. The most dangerous man in any room. This is why the most dangerous person in any room is never the one who talks the most. It's the one who watches. It's not the person who obviously needs validation and approval from others. It's the one who offers nothing and seems to need nothing from anyone. This person doesn't react emotionally to provocations. They don't seek approval or validation. They don't try to impress anyone with their accomplishments or knowledge. And because of this restraint, everyone around them becomes reactive, desperate, and performative, trying desperately to draw them out, trying to make them visible and readable and understandable. But this person remains still, unmoved, unaffected. And in that stillness, they control the entire room without saying a word or making any obvious power play. Let me share something that will change how you see every social interaction for the rest of your life. The void makes others confess. When you're silent in a conversation, other people talk more to fill the uncomfortable space. When you remain emotionally cold, they offer warmth to try to thaw you. When you deliberately withhold something, attention, validation, information, they overshare to compensate. And every single time they give more to fill your nothingness, they lose leverage in the relationship. You don't steal this leverage from them. It is surrendered voluntarily. That's why you must never rush to be known by others. You must never fight to be understood. You must never give people your full shape and let them see all your edges. Instead, blur those edges intentionally. Let them wonder about you. Let them chase the answers you refuse to provide. Because the more they chase, the more they invest. And the more they invest emotionally and psychologically, the more they will unconsciously obey your frame and accept your reality. The modern world's fear of mystery. The modern world, especially in this age of social media and constant connectivity, actively punishes mystery. Contemporary culture wants you loud, transparent, and emotionally exposed at all times. It demands that you share your thoughts, your feelings, your location, your activities, your opinions on every trending topic. But here's what nobody wants to admit. The culture fears silence and mystery. It fears the person who doesn't need to be known, because such a person cannot be controlled. They cannot be framed into a simple narrative. They cannot be predicted, and therefore cannot be manipulated. They cannot be tamed by social pressure or canceled by online mobs. The person who becomes the void doesn't just escape judgment from others. They actually become the one who judges, because everyone else is dancing for attention and validation while this person isn't even clapping. Yet, despite their silence, everyone in the room waits for their next move, their next word, their next glance of approval. Training yourself in the void. I'm going to be honest with you. You must train yourself in this approach, and it will feel profoundly unnatural at first. Every instinct you have will scream at you to speak, to respond, to declare your truth, to make yourself understood. Your ego will desperately want to defend itself, to explain, to justify. Don't give in to these urges. You are not here to be understood by everyone you meet. You are here to be felt, to have an impact, to exert influence, to shape reality around you. And the less you give away freely, the more powerfully others will feel your presence. Every unanswered question about you becomes a psychological hook in their mind. Every delayed reply becomes an emotional investment on their part. Every moment you consciously choose silence over reaction adds to your social weight and perceived status. And soon, you're not just another person they know. They begin to experience you as a force, an element of nature, a presence they cannot ignore no matter how much you say or don't say. Research in social exchange theory confirms this. We value most what we must work to obtain. When you make your attention, your approval, your time, something that must be earned rather than freely given, you automatically increase its perceived value in others' minds. The final layer. The void is discipline. Here's the final layer that most people miss entirely. The void is not actually emptiness. It's not numbness or emotional death or disconnection from reality. The void is discipline. It's control. You feel everything. Every slight, every compliment, every provocation. But you show almost nothing. You calculate carefully before you speak. You delay before you act. You never reveal your hand in any negotiation or conflict unless you've already won the game through superior positioning. And in doing so, you rise above what I call the emotional economy, the constant trading of validation, approval and attention that most people are trapped in their entire lives. You become untouchable, not because you fight harder than everyone else, but because you refuse to play their game by their rules. When someone attacks you verbally, you offer nothing in response. When someone demands answers from you, you offer nothing. When someone begs for your validation or approval, you offer nothing. Because the moment you offer something within their frame of reference, you enter their frame, and your power dies in their hands as they now control the dynamic. But when you remain the void, people are forced to shape themselves around you. They must adapt to your reality, rather than you adapting to theirs. They must enter your frame. They must play by your rules. The fundamental asymmetry of power. The moment you truly internalize this law, that offering nothing creates everything, you begin to understand the fundamental asymmetry of power in all human relationships. Influence does not come from giving more of yourself. It comes from strategically holding back, because when you offer less, what you do eventually give becomes amplified in its impact. A single glance from you means something profound. A single word carries weight. A single movement captures attention. Suddenly, everything about you means something to others, because you've made your presence rare. You've made your responses expensive. You've made your attention valuable. And in a world that is literally drowning in noise, constant content, endless opinions, and desperate attention-seeking, what is rare becomes divine. What is scarce becomes sacred. Most men dilute themselves without even realizing they're doing it. They talk too much in meetings and conversations. They react too quickly to every provocation or piece of bait. They reveal their strategies and intentions too early. They explain and justify and confess in the name of honesty, authenticity, or building connection with others. But here's what they don't understand. Every revelation is a transaction with a cost. Every emotional disclosure is a gamble. And most of the time it's a losing bet. The more you freely give, the more others measure you against their standards. The more they measure you, the more they control you through judgment. And the more they control you, the less you actually matter in the broader scheme of things. That's the hidden cost of excessive openness that nobody talks about. You become predictable. And what's predictable is controllable. And what's controllable has no real power. But the void cannot be measured because it refuses to reveal itself fully. It absorbs information rather than broadcasting it. It watches rather than performs. It waits rather than rushing. And in that patient waiting, it grows heavier and heavier with accumulated power. It dominates space without action. It creates presence without performance. And this is precisely what unnerves people at a deep, often subconscious level. They're not disturbed because you're doing too much. They're disturbed because you're doing nothing, and yet they still feel your weight pressing on them. The negotiation table. Let me give you a concrete example that illustrates this principle perfectly. Imagine a negotiation between two people sitting across a table from each other. One person speaks quickly, eagerly trying to persuade, to explain their position, to fill every moment of silence with words and reasoning. The other person just watches, still, silent, neutral, barely moving. Who holds the real power in this scenario? Obviously, it's the one who says nothing, because their silence forces the other person into exposure. It creates a deep discomfort that humans instinctively try to resolve by filling the void with information. Concessions, revelations, and in that discomfort, the talkative person starts offering far more than they originally intended. More details about their situation, more concessions in the negotiation, more truth about their real position and needs. The silent person gains all this information without giving anything in return. That is the power of the void in action. It appears passive to the untrained eye, but it's actually a trap, a psychological mechanism that others fall into willingly. Mastering the Machiavellian art. The truly Machiavellian individual learns to master this art systematically. They train their face to be unreadable, practicing in front of mirrors and in low-stakes social situations. They train their voice to be measured and controlled, never revealing excess emotion through tone. They train their energy to be restrained and contained, never leaking out needily. This isn't about suppressing yourself or denying your humanity. It's about understanding that expression is power, and power must be used strategically, not leaked carelessly. To express everything all the time is to give away your throne. To express almost nothing is to make others bring their offerings to you voluntarily. This is not about becoming emotionally dead or disconnected from your feelings. It's about becoming strategically empty in your external presentation while remaining full of awareness internally. To feel everything, but show almost nothing. That discipline is what makes you genuinely terrifying to those who might oppose you or try to manipulate you. Because people can sense that you're not numb or clueless. But they cannot read you. They can feel there's fire behind your eyes, intense awareness and intelligence, But they don't know what it's burning for. They don't know what you want. They don't know what you're planning. And that unknowing is what draws them in like gravity. Your power comes not from what you reveal, but from what you refuse to reveal. Application to relationships. Let me apply this principle to relationships. Romantic, social, and professional. Because this is where most people completely get it wrong and sabotage themselves. Most people give far too much, far too soon. They pour their thoughts, their entire history, their deepest emotions into another person's lap, desperately hoping this vulnerability will build intimacy and connection. But it doesn't build intimacy. It builds familiarity. And familiarity kills mystery, which is the actual foundation of sustained attraction and respect. The person who gives too much is loved for convenience, not for power. They become comfortable, predictable, safe, but never fascinating, never deeply desired, never irreplaceable. But when you give nothing, no excessive emotional validation, no detailed explanation of your feelings, no desperate attempts to be understood and accepted, you become genuinely fascinating to others. People lean in, expending enormous energy trying to figure you out. They assign depth to your silence. They imagine complexity in your restraint. And in that imagination, they create your legend in their own minds. Because here's the truth that most people won't admit. People don't actually fall in love with you as you objectively are. They fall in love with what they imagine you are. And the less you give them, the more space they have for that projection. If you want to be remembered, if you want to haunt someone's thoughts, don't explain yourself. Let them wonder. Let them obsess. Let them try desperately to make sense of you in your absence. That's how you haunt people long after you physically left the room. Even enemies are weakened. Even your enemies and opponents are weakened by this law in profound ways. When someone insults you or attacks you, they expect a reaction. They expect visible emotion, anger, hurt, defensiveness. They want to see if their attack hit the mark and affected you. If you respond with fury or obvious hurt, you confirm their relevance and power over you. You validate their ability to affect your emotional state. But if you remain still, blank, completely unbothered by their attack, you deny them everything they were seeking. And in that denial, you win decisively, because they cannot read your silence. They cannot feed off your energy like an emotional vampire. And eventually, they begin to question themselves in ways that eat at them. Did I miss? Did my attack not even matter? Did they not care? Do I even matter to this person? And that doubt, once planted in someone's mind, grows like rot. You didn't destroy them with force or a clever comeback. You destroyed them with emptiness, with the void, with your refusal to play their game. Machiavelli understood this principle on a political level when he advised rulers in The Prince. He told them to be feared more than loved, but more importantly, to remain mysterious. The ruler who shows all his cards, who makes all his intentions clear, invites betrayal because he's predictable. But the one who moves unpredictably, who speaks sparingly, who reveals only what is strategically necessary, that ruler becomes a legend. People begin to speak about such a person in hushed whispers. They speculate endlessly about motives and plans. They invent stories and theories. And in doing so, they build a myth that becomes larger than the reality. That is the power of the void. People fill it with their own meaning, their own fears, their own fantasies. Combining void with presence now, this law becomes even more dangerous and effective when you combine it with powerful presence. If you are nothing and look like nothing, timid, weak, forgettable, people will simply forget you exist. You'll fade into the background. But if you are nothing internally revealed, yet look like power externally, like confidence, like controlled danger, like coiled potential, you become absolutely unforgettable. That contrast is what leaves a permanent mark on people's consciousness. Picture this: stone-cold eyes that reveal nothing, set in a calm face. Silence that somehow radiates gravity and weight. The unspoken confidence of someone who walks through noise without reacting to any of it, unbothered by the chaos around them. You don't need to convince people of your worth with words and explanations. You need only carry yourself like someone who never explains, someone who never justifies, someone who simply is. And once people feel that posture, that energy, they will either rise to meet your level or fall apart trying. Your first weapon is always silence. Let me take this even further into practical application. In every situation you encounter, your first weapon should always be silence. Not as a gimmick or trick, but as a test of others and a protection of yourself. Say less in meetings and watch what happens. Respond slower in conversations. Offer nothing emotional when confronted or provoked. Just watch what unfolds. Most people will absolutely trip over themselves to break the silence you create. They'll overcommit to positions they didn't need to take. They'll over-reveal information they should have kept private. They'll desperately try to pull you in, to get a reaction, to understand where you stand. And you won't need to do a single thing. Because when you are the void, the entire world becomes reactive to you. You don't react, you cause reactions. And that's the ultimate advantage in any social, professional, or adversarial situation. You dictate the tempo of interactions. You control the rhythm of conversations. You create discomfort and pressure by simply existing in your silence. This is the complete opposite of desperation. Most people desperately need to be seen and acknowledged. You do not. Most people need to be liked by everyone they meet. You do not. Most people need to be understood and validated. You have transcended that need. And your refusal to participate in their emotional economy is precisely what makes you rich in influence and power. They start to give freely, attention, effort, concessions. They start to chase what you're not offering. They start to open up to you while you remain closed. And all you gave them was nothing. Not because you were playing games or manipulating them, but because you are the void. And in the void, there is no need, no lack, no hunger, only gravity. And gravity always pulls without any visible effort. The true challenge, this Machiavellian law, is one that most people will never practice, never master, never even attempt. Why? Because it demands something most people simply don't possess: inner stillness. It demands real composure under pressure. It demands the strength to not perform when everyone around you is performing desperately. But once you master this principle, something magical happens. You'll never chase anything or anyone again. You'll never beg for opportunities. You'll never plead for respect. Because when you become the void, people will bring you everything: opportunities, respect, loyalty, even love, just to escape the silence you never try to break. They'll give you what you want just for a chance to understand you, to connect with you, to matter to you. Silence as dominance. Once you fully understand that silence is not absence but dominance, you stop treating expression as power. You start treating containment as control. You realize at a cellular level that the less you offer, the more you are pursued, not because people are inherently kind or generous, but because they are psychologically addicted to the unknown. Curiosity is one of the most manipulative forces in all of human psychology. It's hardwired into our brains, evolutionarily adaptive, impossible to fully suppress. And when you master the art of offering nothing, you become the source of that addictive curiosity, not through lies or deception or elaborate games, but through your simple refusal to fill in the blanks that others desperately want filled. This is not about playing games with people. This is about removing yourself from the game entirely. You are not unpredictable because you try to be random. You are unpredictable because you give others nothing to predict. There is no rhythm for them to follow, no emotional trail to decode, no pattern to exploit. You become the blank page that drives them insane with curiosity. Because most people are so accustomed to reading others like cheap paperback books that when they encounter someone with no pages, no clear narrative, and no obvious explanation, they spiral into obsession. And the deeper their spiral, the deeper their investment in you becomes. Because that's the paradox of the void. The less you give, the more they give. They fill your silence with their effort. They project their hopes, fears, and fantasies onto you. They build a version of you in their minds that is so powerful, it overshadows the real thing. And you say nothing. You remain calm. You remain still. You remain unknown. And you win. The silent man who controls the room. Let me paint you a picture. Walk into a room where everyone is desperately trying to prove something. Their status, their intelligence, their charm, their authority, their worth. They're all performing, posturing, signaling their value like peacocks displaying feathers. Now imagine one person who walks in, sits down, and says almost nothing. This person listens more than they speak. Their eyes don't dart around nervously seeking approval. They don't laugh to fit in or to ease social tension. They don't interrupt others or compete for attention. They don't chase the spotlight, and yet they become the spotlight. Not because of what they do, but because of what they refuse to do. Everyone else is desperately trying to be seen. This person is completely fine with being invisible, and paradoxically, that terrifies the room. Because if this person doesn't want or need to be seen, doesn't need validation or approval, maybe they're already above everyone else in the hierarchy. Maybe they've already won before anyone else realized there was a game being played. That's the effect of the void in social dynamics. It's not passive at all. It's threatening in a subtle way, because it implies total control. Control of self, control of impulse, control of narrative. And the person who can control themselves completely will always end up controlling others eventually. Machiavelli would say something like this: if you must reveal something about yourself, let it be exactly enough to create uncertainty. Say something cryptic and walk away. Smile without context. Withhold praise when it's expected. Delay your answers beyond what's comfortable. Always keep them guessing. Not because you enjoy cruelty for its own sake, but because guessing is actually a form of psychological submission. When people are guessing about you, they are no longer thinking about themselves or their own agenda. They are now trapped in your frame, trying to understand your frame. That shift is where you've already won. The void doesn't ask for loyalty. It creates loyalty organically. The void doesn't seek validation. It actually reverses the flow, making others seek validation from it. The void doesn't move forward eagerly to be welcomed. It waits to be invited, and in that waiting, makes others question whether they even deserve its presence. This is psychological warfare, subtle, elegant, and absolutely devastating when executed properly. Relationships through the void. Let's now look at all your relationships through this lens: romantic, social, professional. Most people believe that genuine connection requires constant expression and openness. And yes, connection does require some vulnerability and sharing eventually. But the most high-value people don't reveal themselves quickly or easily. They delay intimacy deliberately. They filter relentlessly. They test others through silence, because anyone who is real, anyone who has genuine value, will remain curious and engaged through the silence. Anyone who is fake, shallow, or low value will grow resentful of your restraint and reveal themselves. In this way, the void becomes not just a method of control, but a method of selection. It's a filtering mechanism that protects you from wasting time and energy on the wrong people. And once you begin to use the void this way, something beautiful happens. You no longer waste your time. You no longer chase people desperately trying to prove your worth. You no longer entertain people who only love you when you perform for them. You just wait and watch, and the world begins to sort itself around you. The ones who can't handle your silence were never going to handle your truth anyway. The ones who grow impatient with your distance were never going to be stable with your closeness. The ones who walk away when you offer nothing would have drained you completely when you gave them everything. This is how the void protects you. Not by keeping all people out, but by letting the wrong people remove themselves voluntarily. Emotional minimalism. And that's when you reach a new tier of power that I call emotional minimalism. You begin to live with fewer explanations, fewer apologies, fewer words. But paradoxically, every word you do speak becomes sacred and impactful. Because when you say nothing 90% of the time, the 10% you do say reshapes the entire room. It lands harder. It is remembered longer. It carries enormous weight, because people know instinctively that you don't speak just to be heard. You speak only when you have already won. Let me be absolutely clear about something. This way of being is not natural for most people. It must be forged through conscious effort and practice. You will have to kill the part of yourself that desperately wants to prove your worth. You will have to suffocate the part of you that feels empty and anxious in silence. You will have to bury the instinct to be liked by everyone you meet. And what will rise from that grave is a version of you that no longer moves for affection, but attracts it anyway. Not because you played a role or put on a mask, but because you became a presence. Solid, grounded, unshakable. This is the Machiavellian void. Not emptiness, but dominance through absence. Not silence as passivity, but silence as tension. You become the unsaid sentence that everyone wants to hear. the unfought battle that everyone fears, the unseen threat that everyone respects. And it drives people mad because they cannot possess what they cannot define. You are no longer offering anything freely. Not your opinion, not your emotion, not your access, not your approval. And because of that strategic withholding, people offer you everything just to see what you might give next. And the secret? You never give it, you wait. And when you do finally give something, they fall to their knees grateful for scraps. Architecture, not manipulation. This is not manipulation in the traditional sense. This is architecture. You are building demand through discipline. You are shaping attention through absence. You are controlling perception through restraint. Because at the highest level of power, it is not what you say that moves people. It is what you deliberately withhold. Eventually, the void stops being a strategy you consciously implement and becomes your very identity. You're no longer faking restraint or calculating your silence moment by moment. You've lived in it long enough that it becomes effortless, automatic, part of who you are. And that's when it becomes truly lethal. Because now people can't tell whether you're holding back or whether this is just who you are. That uncertainty, that aura of unknowability, is what begins to pull people toward you. Like gravity pulls planets toward the sun. They don't know what you want from them. They don't know what you feel about them. They don't know what you're thinking about anything. But they feel you. They feel your absence when you're not there. They feel your presence without you speaking. They feel your power even when you're sitting perfectly still. And it drives them mad in the most addictive way possible. This is how kings are truly made. Because when the world realizes it cannot read you, it starts trying to serve you, to guess your motives and desires, to please your silence, to win your attention. Not because you demanded any of this, but because you refused to ask for it. The void becomes a throne, and people kneel before it because they're terrified of what you'll say when you finally do speak. Or worse, terrified of what will happen if you never speak to them at all. Making this practical. Let me make this extremely practical for you right now. Everywhere you go, you carry energy. Most people use that energy to fill space constantly, cracking jokes, making small talk, keeping conversations moving, preventing awkward silence. They hate silence. They hate the unknown. They fear being forgotten, so they become clowns, entertainers, people pleasers, always smoothing over tension with talk. But you're going to be different. You're going to let the silence do the talking. You're going to let the tension build. You're going to let others stumble into their own discomfort trying to interpret you. Because you've learned that silence is not a void to be filled. It's a weapon to be sharpened. Every moment you don't speak makes them speak more. Every glance you don't return makes them crave it. Every question you ignore makes them ask it again, louder, more desperately. And in that desperation, you are fed information, leverage, and power. You now understand that by becoming less available, you become more powerful. And that doesn't just apply to your attention. It applies to your emotion, your validation, your vulnerability, your access. The less of you they can have, the more of themselves they will give to get it. And this is exactly what Machiavelli knew when he wrote that a prince should never reveal all his thoughts. He said it plainly. It is not necessary to be completely honest, only to appear honest. Why did he say this? Because revealing your true mind makes you predictable. And what's predictable is controllable. But the void cannot be predicted. The void cannot be controlled. The void is not a person you understand intellectually. It is a person you feel viscerally. And the moment you become that person, everything changes. People stop speaking to you casually. They pause before texting you, wondering if they should or shouldn't. They rehearse what they'll say before calling you. They constantly ask themselves, did I do something wrong? Why haven't they responded? Even when you've said nothing at all, done nothing wrong, made no judgment. Why does this happen? Because the emotional economy between you and them has completely flipped. You are no longer buying attention from others. You are now the currency itself. They don't automatically get your time. They must earn it. They don't get your thoughts freely. They must wait for them. They don't get your energy on demand. They must pay for it with respect, effort, and sometimes obsession. And if they don't, you remain the void, still silent, completely unshaken. You don't punish people by reacting emotionally. You punish people by refusing to react at all. You don't chase to prove your worth to anyone. You simply leave the door open and let your absence do all the talking. And that absence, that beautiful, unbearable, echoing absence, It burns people from the inside because it exposes a fundamental truth they can't escape. They were never in control of the dynamic. You were, because you needed nothing from them, while they needed everything from you. The final form of power. That is the final form of power. The person who offers nothing is never obligated to anyone. He is never owned by anyone. He is never guilted into submission by social pressure, because he is already full, already anchored, already home within himself. He doesn't need external validation to feel complete. So when people beg for access to him, he grants it slowly, if at all. When they seek his validation and approval, he withholds it, not out of cruelty, but because it's genuinely scarce and valuable. And when they finally do get something from him, just a glance, a word, a moment of attention, it feels like gold to them. Not because it's flashy or dramatic, but because it's rare. You've now become the embodiment of asymmetrical value. You give almost nothing and receive everything in return, because you understand what most people never will. In a world absolutely full of performers, clowns and noisemakers desperately seeking attention, the one who becomes the void becomes the stage itself, and the entire world performs for you. Identity forged by fire. At the highest level, the void is not just a strategy you employ, it's your identity, forged by fire and experience. You didn't choose to become it because it looked cool or seemed manipulative. You became it because the world pushed you to the edge, and instead of falling over that edge, you vanished. You erased the part of yourself that needed to be understood by everyone. You cut off the part that needed to be validated by others. You suffocated the part that begged desperately to be seen and acknowledged. And what remained after that psychological death and rebirth was stillness, but not emptiness. Because the void is not hollow. The void is actually full of control, of vision, of self-containment. It is power with no noise. It is command without obvious movement. It is presence without explanation or justification. Most people live in absolute fear of being ignored, of being invisible, of not mattering. The Machiavellian individual builds an entire empire on that very foundation. Because when you offer the world nothing, no approval, no neediness, no energy to feed on, the world is forced to orbit around you like planets around the sun. That's the secret that every master manipulator, every successful ruler, every cultural icon throughout history has understood. The less you give, the more they need. And eventually, they give you everything. Their loyalty, their time, their resources, their very souls, just for a taste of your attention, just for a moment of your insight, just to feel close to something they cannot control or fully understand. It's psychological gravity operating at full force. And you've become the black hole at the center of your social universe. People throw their affection into you. They throw their curiosity into you. They throw their vulnerability into you. And you remain perfectly still, because you're not here to greedily take what they offer. You're here to make them want to offer it in the first place. The law of the void in action. That's the law of the void in its purest form. You don't chase, and yet you are chased. You don't demand, and yet you are obeyed. You don't beg for anything, because you already own the thing everyone's selling desperately. Internal stability, self-possession, groundedness. And the world is absolutely starving for it in this age of anxiety and constant validation seeking. So now your silence becomes sacred to those around you. Your presence becomes heavy and meaningful. Even your absence becomes a powerful signal. You can leave a room, and your name will continue to echo in conversations. You can stay silent in a meeting, and the tension will speak volumes. You can offer nothing, and still receive everything. Let's look at the battlefield of modern life with fresh eyes. Everyone around you is screaming desperately to be seen, posting every thought on social media, performing for likes and follows, declaring their opinions on every trending topic, arguing with strangers online, crying out for digital attention like beggars at the gate of the algorithm. They don't even realize they've become slaves to reaction. Everything they do is specifically designed to provoke something from others. A like, a comment, a share, an argument, any acknowledgement of their existence. And in that desperate performance, they hand over all their power to the crowd. But you are not one of them. You are not moved by likes or follower counts. You are not addicted to external validation. You are not a performer in someone else's arena, dancing for scraps of attention. You are the one who watches silently, the one who waits patiently, The one who says little and owns the entire room with a single glance because people feel something emanating from you that they can't quite name. They feel your refusal to need them. And that refusal dominates them more completely than any passionate speech, any threat, or any emotional plea ever could. How kings rule. This is how kings have ruled throughout history. With silence, with composure, with boundaries so strong that others mistake them for impenetrable walls. But they're not walls designed to keep everyone out. They're filters. Only those who can handle the silence are worthy of eventually hearing the sound. Only those who don't flinch or run away when they're ignored are worthy of a response. Only those who give value without needing an immediate reaction are allowed into the inner circle. That's how you scale the void from simple psychological power to building a social empire. Because now your silence is not just personal power. It's your branding, your reputation, your currency in the social marketplace. People talk about you when you're not around, specifically because you say so little. They study your rare words like ancient scripture because you say so few of them. They watch your moves like prophecy because they're so infrequent and unpredictable. This is not mystery as a cheap tactic. This is discipline as destiny. Because here's what nobody tells you when you're starting out. When you give too much, too often, too freely to everyone, you become completely disposable. You become forgettable. You become background noise. But when you become scarce, not through hiding or running away, but through genuine emotional self-sufficiency, you become essential. You become unforgettable. You become the reference point that others measure themselves against. People don't want what's always available. Research in behavioral economics consistently shows this. They want what feels earned, what feels exclusive, what feels rare. And when you become the void, everything you eventually give feels deeply earned. Even a glance, even a brief reply, even your silence carries weight. That's what drives people absolutely mad. They know you're watching and aware. They know you're processing and thinking. But you don't move until you choose to. And when you do finally move, when you do finally speak, when you do finally act, you command full attention, full obedience, full leverage. Because everyone knows you could have just as easily ignored them. They know you don't need them. And that's exactly why they give you their soul. The unmovable object. Now you've reached the final layer of this transformation. You've become what I call the unmovable object. Not because you're stubborn or rigid, but because you're full of direction, full of purpose, full of presence, full of power that doesn't need external validation to exist. And in this fullness, you offer the world nothing in terms of emotional labor. No excessive explanation, no obvious hunger, no visible desperation. And in return, they offer you everything they once withheld from everyone else. Genuine respect, loyalty, obsession, obedience. Because they feel it now at a visceral level. They feel what you are. They feel the difference between you and everyone else scrambling for attention. You are the person who does not react emotionally to provocations. You are the person who cannot be pulled into other people's frames. You are the person who does not beg, does not chase, does not explain yourself to those who haven't earned explanations. You are the void. And the void always wins in the end. Practical implementation steps. Let me give you specific, practical steps to begin implementing this immediately in your life. First, start with your digital presence. Stop posting so frequently. Stop commenting on everything. Stop responding to every message within seconds. Create space between stimuli and response. Let messages sit unanswered for hours or even days, unless there's a genuine emergency. Watch how people's perception of you changes when you're less available. Second, in conversations, practice listening 3 times more than you speak. When someone asks you a question, pause for 3 full seconds before responding. Let them sit in that uncomfortable silence. Notice how they often start talking again to fill the void you've created, revealing far more than they intended. Third, stop explaining yourself constantly. When someone questions your decisions, you don't owe them a detailed breakdown of your reasoning. A simple, "It's what I decided," or "I had my reasons," is sufficient. Let them wonder. Let them fill in the blanks with their imagination. Fourth, eliminate approval-seeking behavior. Stop asking, "Is this okay?" or "What do you think?" when you've already made a decision. Stop seeking permission from people who have no authority over you. Make your moves and let others react. Fifth, practice outcome independence. Before entering any social situation, negotiation, or interaction, mentally detach from the outcome. Tell yourself, I don't need this to go any particular way. I'm completely fine with whatever happens. This removes the desperate energy that others can smell a mile away. Sixth, master your facial expressions and body language. Practice maintaining a neutral, calm expression, even when you feel strong emotions internally. Don't let every thought and feeling play across your face like a movie screen. Become unreadable. Seventh, delay gratification in communication. When you have something exciting to share, don't immediately tell everyone. Hold it. Let it build. Share it strategically with only those who've earned the information. Notice how much more impact it has. The neuroscience behind the void. Let me share some fascinating neuroscience that explains why this works so effectively. Research on the brain's reward system shows that unpredictable rewards are far more addictive than predictable ones. This is why gambling is so addictive. You never know when the payoff will come. When you become the void, you essentially turn yourself into an unpredictable reward system for others. Sometimes you respond, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're warm, sometimes you're distant. Sometimes you give attention, sometimes you withhold it. This unpredictability activates the dopamine system in others' brains far more powerfully than if you were consistently available. Studies on intermittent reinforcement in behavioral psychology show that this pattern creates the strongest behavioral conditioning. It's more powerful than either constant reward or constant punishment. The uncertainty keeps people hooked. Constantly checking, constantly wondering, constantly seeking your approval or attention. Additionally, research on the brain's default mode network shows that when we encounter gaps in information, our minds automatically work to fill those gaps. This is an unconscious process that happens whether we want it to or not. When you provide those gaps by saying little and revealing less, you force others' brains to work overtime, trying to complete the picture. This mental effort creates investment, and that investment creates attachment. The dark side warnings. I need to give you an important warning about the dark side of this power. This knowledge can be used destructively. You could use these principles to manipulate vulnerable people, to abuse those who care about you, to exploit others for purely selfish gain. But here's the thing. True power doesn't need to destroy. True power doesn't need to abuse. True power can be used to protect yourself, to filter for quality relationships, to command respect in your professional life, and to avoid being manipulated by others. Use the void to protect yourself from energy vampires and manipulators. Use it to establish healthy boundaries. Use it to ensure you're valued appropriately. But don't use it to deliberately harm people who are genuinely trying to connect with you in good faith. The difference is this. The void should be a filter, not a weapon. It should separate those who can handle your depth from those who can't. Not destroy people for entertainment. Long-term transformation. As you practice this over months and years, you'll notice a fundamental transformation in your life. The quality of people around you will dramatically improve. Low-value people who need constant entertainment and validation will naturally drift away. High-value people who respect boundaries and depth will remain and grow closer. Your professional life will transform. You'll stop being overlooked in meetings. Your words will carry more weight. People will seek your opinion specifically because you don't offer it freely. You'll be offered opportunities you never chased. Your romantic life will transform. You'll stop attracting people who want to drain you. You'll start attracting people who are fascinated by your depth. The desperate, needy energy that repels high-value partners will evaporate, replaced by an attractive self-sufficiency. But most importantly, your internal world will transform. You'll stop needing external validation to feel okay about yourself. You'll develop a core of steel that can't be shaken by others' opinions. You'll become genuinely comfortable in silence, in solitude, in your own presence. The ultimate freedom. And this is where the void leads you ultimately to freedom. Freedom from the opinion of others. Freedom from the need to be understood. Freedom from the exhausting performance that most people mistake for living. You become free to be exactly who you are without apology, without explanation, without the desperate need for approval. And paradoxically, this freedom, this refusal to need others, is precisely what makes others need you. This is the great irony of human psychology. The person who needs nothing attracts everything. The person who chases nothing is chased by everything. The person who offers nothing is offered everything. Conclusion: becoming the void. So here's my challenge to you. For the next 30 days, implement just one principle from this teaching. Pick one. Maybe it's speaking 50% less than you normally would. Maybe it's waiting 3 seconds before responding to questions. Maybe it's not explaining yourself when questioned. Maybe it's becoming comfortable with silence. Just one principle, practiced consistently for 30 days. Watch what happens. Watch how people's behavior toward you shifts. Watch how your own inner state becomes more calm, more centered, more powerful. Because the void is not something you do, it's something you become. It's not a mask you put on, it's a transformation you undergo. It's not manipulation, it's mastery. Mastery of self, mastery of presence, mastery of social dynamics. And once you taste this power, once you feel what it's like to have people lean in when you've said nothing, once you experience the respect that comes from strategic silence, you'll never go back to the desperate, noisy, approval-seeking version of yourself. You'll understand what Machiavelli knew, what the greatest leaders throughout history understood, what the most magnetic people have always known. The void is not weakness. The void is not absence. The void is the ultimate power. Offer them nothing, and they will give you everything. Become the void, and the world will shape itself around you. That's the law of the void. Master it, and you master reality itself.